All right, today we're diving into something really cool. We're going to crack open a 2,000-year-old legal case file from the Talmud to solve a fascinating puzzle about the very nature of holiness.
You know, at its core, this whole thing is about a huge question, one that people have asked for thousands of years. How does an ordinary object become sacred? What's that exact moment when something mundane, like, say, flour or oil, transforms into something holy? Where is that invisible line?
So the object we're talking about here is an ancient temple ritual. It's called the meal offering, or mincha in Hebrew. And this wasn't just some minor thing. It was a really foundational, non-animal sacrifice, a total staple of the temple service. And of course, it had a very specific recipe. You've got your fine flour, you mix that with some pure olive oil, and then you place this aromatic frankincense right on top. Super simple ingredients, right? But put them together and boom, you've got a sacred offering. But here's the kicker. The real question was, how together did they actually need to be for that magic to happen?
And that right there, that's the central legal puzzle that had some of the greatest minds of the ancient world totally hooked. It all comes down to this idea of sanctification. You know, the actual act of making something holy by putting it into a special sacred vessel in the temple.
Okay, so let's get right to it. Here's the question. To make this offering holy, do all three ingredients, the flour, the oil, and the frankincense, have to be in that sacred vessel together at the exact same time? Or could you do it step by step? Like, could you sanctify the flour first and then add the other stuff later? I know, it might sound like we're splitting hairs here, but for these ancient sages, the truth was always in the detail.
And believe me, this question kicked off a huge debate. You've got two intellectual heavyweights from the 3rd century going head-to-head, Rav Hid versus Rabbi Chanina. So let's break down what each of them had to say.
All right, first up, we've got Rav. His take is basically this. The ingredients don't have to be a unified package to become sacred. He's all about the idea of separate sanctification.
And Rav's argument, which we have quoted right from the Talmud, is super bold and clear. He basically says a meal offering can become holy without its oil or without its frankincense, and even without both of them. So for Rav, you can totally achieve holiness one piece at a time.
Now, Rav isn't just pulling this out of thin air. He's a lawyer, basically, and he builds his whole case on legal precedent. He points to all these other offerings that were already happening in the temple. You've got the showbread, that was sanctified without any oil. Then there's the sinner's offering, which was literally just flour, no oil, no frankincense. The libation offering, no frankincense there either. So he's saying, look, in all these cases, a single part became holy all by itself. It's a really powerful, evidence-based argument, you have to admit.
But then Rabbi Chanina fires right back, and he has a totally different take. For him, this offering is an indivisible whole. It's all about unity.
His position is just absolute. He's saying, look, for a standard meal offering that needs all three things, there's no way you can sanctify one part without the others. The flour isn't holy without the oil isn't holy without the flour. It's an all-or-nothing deal, period.
So here's the core conflict, right? It's this deep philosophical split. On one side, Rav sees the offering as basically a collection of parts, and each part can be made holy on its own. But on the other side, Rabbi Chanina sees it as this one inseparable thing that only becomes holy when all its pieces are united in that sacred vessel.
Okay, but this is where the debate gets really juicy. Someone could totally challenge Rabbi Chanina and say, hey, wait a minute. If you can't sanctify flour by itself, then why in the world did the temple have these special, holy measuring cups designed just for flour or just for oil? What's the point of them? It's a great question, a really solid, logical challenge.
And Rabbi Chanina, man, he has a brilliant comeback. He says, oh, those vessels, they weren't for the standard meal offering. He argues they were for other, really specific rituals that only needed that one ingredient. Remember that sinner's offering that was just flour? Or the leper's offering, which used only oil? That's what those cups were for. He just so neatly resolves that contradiction and still holds his ground. It's pretty impressive.
So at this point, it really feels like a stalemate, right? A total deadlock. But then, a third sage enters the picture. His name is Shmuel. And he brings an argument that is so smart, so elegant, that it basically settles the whole thing.
Okay, so here's how Shmuel does it. He starts with a very basic, totally accepted rule in the temple. Everybody agreed on this. The special cups for dry stuff, like flour, could only make dry things holy, and the cups for wet stuff, like oil or wine, could only make liquids holy. Simple enough, right? A very clear, functional rule. But then, Shmuel points to a fascinating exception.
He says, what about the big bowls? See, these bowls were mostly used for liquids, like the blood of an animal offering. But, and this is the key, they were also used for the meal offering. So hang on, you have a wet vessel that the Torah itself says can sanctify dry goods. This is the linchpin of his whole argument.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Hold on a second. A meal offering has oil mixed in with the flour. It's basically a wet dough, right? So how does this prove anything about sanctifying something that's truly 100% dry? And you're not alone. That's a great objection, and the Talmud brings it up too.
And this is where we see Shmuel's genius. He points to that third ingredient we talked about, the frankincense. Remember, the frankincense was never mixed into the dough. It was just placed on top. It stayed completely dry, completely separate from the wet mixture.
And there it is. That's the knockout punch. Think about it. If the whole meal offering is put into that sacred bowl, then the bowl has to be sanctifying the dry frankincense on top. And if that bowl can sanctify the frankincense all by itself, well, that proves that a component can be made holy separately from the others. Shmuel's logic lands squarely in Rav's corner. Case closed.
So, you might be wondering, okay, why do we just spend all this time unpacking this super detailed ancient argument? Well, because this whole thing is about way more than just flour and oil.
What a debate like this really gives us is a window into a completely different mindset. I mean, you can see a legal system here that is obsessed with consistency and building arguments on precedent, which sounds a lot like modern law, right? It shows this incredibly deep concern for the anatomy of a sacred act. How is holiness actually built piece by piece? It's a masterclass in using super detailed, step-by-step reasoning to figure out the connection between the physical world and the divine.
And that kind of leaves us with a question for today, for our own lives. I mean, think about it. Think about a courtroom, or a wedding, or even just a formal dinner party. What are all those little specific steps and ingredients that we insist on to make an ordinary event feel official, or binding, or just plain special? Maybe the anatomy of a sacred act is still around, just wearing different clothes.